Men and women of Reddit who caught their significant others cheating. How did you do that and what was your reaction? My ex-husband and his family smoked a lot of pot, still do. His sister, kids, and nanny were visiting from out of state for a few weeks. When it was time to fly home, they left their stash at my ex-Mill's house because they didn't want to take it on the plane. My ex asked if I would pick it up because I was nearby. Stupidly, I agree. I don't smoke and I was willing to carry it in my car for him. To my surprise, I found a note from the nanny to my ex saying she was in love with him and she was so happy for the time they had together. Obviously she thought he would get the weed instead of me. While it was incredibly painful at the time, I am definitely living my best life 15 years later. My ex-husband was an early adopter of sending D-pics. I got his phone to get the numbers of his friends to invite them to a surprise birthday party while he was sleeping off a hangover, and there they were in his outbacks. This was more than 12 years ago, when camera phones were barely functional. Worst one I know of is an acquaintance of mine came home from work one day and found his missus having sex with his dad. That blew up all over Facebook and became a local drama fest where people tried to organize a shunning of the dad and missus. I remember it well because, well, I know people cheat, but with your partner's father? Come on. That's hard to beat. A guy I know was cheating on his wife and she unexpectedly came home for lunch. They lived on a busy street in a small town. Wife grabbed girlfriend by her long hair and threw her out on the street naked. And that's how the whole town found out. Wife was acting unusual for a few weeks. She would want to spend time by herself on the weekends, and when she came home at night from work she would often sit in the driveway for 20 minutes on the phone. I'm not dumb. I bought a voice-activated digital recorder and stuck it in her car. I knew what I needed to know in less than 24 hours. I was in the Navy and was out on deployment for 6 months after just recently getting engaged. It's one of those stupid things that young military guys do. One day I get a letter from my fiance's best friend telling me that she caught my fiancé and her BF together. This was years before email and smartphones were common. We write back and forth several times and eventually it comes out how she caught them. How my fiancé begged her not to tell me, and that the fiancé didn't know that we were corresponding. I eventually get back to the States and planned to play it off as though I didn't know, but too many of my friends intercepted me with the news that it wasn't just the one guy, but several, and let me know that she knew that I was aware. Eventually we met, and the confrontation was minimal and tame. We broke off the engagement without a lot of drama. She kept the ring. The best friend and I ended up hooking up, at first as sort of a revenge frick kinda thing, but turned serious. We celebrate our 32nd wedding anniversary this year. Edit, maths. This year will be 31. After 20, it's all a blur. I had some really good friends in the next town over where my girlfriend lived, and they figured it out for me. They were super gentle about it, and patient with me through my denial. Those are real friends. We were together for 5 years, living together for around 4. I came home from work early. When I got out of my car I saw her peek through the blinds to see who was outside. I walked in the door to her co-worker on the couch, obviously uncomfortable and clothes messy, and her locked in the bathroom. I wanted to pummel the shit out of him then and there, but he was a trained MMA fighter, and I Wilder left the house that night with more than a broken heart. Went to a friend's house for a while. They started dating the next day. Shit sucks. It took a while for me to get trust back in relationships. Edit, her co-worker had been to many gatherings, and no, I wouldn't beat a woman's A even though, yes, she was more deserving. Thank you all for the comments. It was 10 plus years ago, and I'm doing good. My ex was a big drinker and I wasn't. She would frequent this bar close to our place pretty often with friends. I rarely went because I just wasn't a fan of bars or her drinking friends. One night she went out with a couple that I didn't mind that much. I was bored at home, so I decided to head over for a little bit. As I walk in, I see my ex sitting at the bar with the couple. The bar was packed, and as soon as I made eye contact my ex, she had this strange look on her face. She turns to this guy sitting next to her, and he immediately gets up and leaves. I felt something strange right away, but I brushed it off as me being irrational. I stayed for like an hour and headed home. I couldn't shake the feeling I had though, so I checked one of her friend's Facebook page to see if there was any connection that existed between my ex and this random dude. Sure enough, he was friends with one of my ex's friends. I knew his name now, and that I wasn't as crazy as I thought. I sat on the information though. The next weekend she goes out drinking again and still had not returned home at 4 AM. I tried contacting her multiple times and I got no response. I woke up to her coming home at 7 AM and jumping in the shower immediately. I decided to check her phone while she was in the shower, and she kept all of the messages with this same guy. Some pretty telling information in the text thread. While she was still showering, I grabbed a fresh pair of clothes and headed to my best friend's house. 20 minutes later I get a phone call with her going apeshit about me leaving and not saying anything. I laughed at the projection, told her that if she wasn't moved out by Monday the police would be there to force her out. She wasn't on the lease and her parents lived 10 minutes away from me. That was that. For the rest of you guys, leaving your ex alone in your home while she packs is a great way to have your stuff stolen trashed. Went for my yearly checkup and tested positive for chlamydia. Turns out my ex was sleeping around. Edit. Apparently false positives are common with these types of tests, so have yours tested as well. I hope you're in a relationship where you can openly talk about such things. She confessed to her mom. Then mother-in-law called her other daughter and told her. Sister-in-law then called me and told me. She let me listen in on a three-way call to her mom and tried to convince mom to tell me, but she refused, which basically confirmed it. It wasn't a big damn breaking moment. It was a lot of little things. Like how she'd cancel plans at the last second. All the random phone calls from unknown numbers she'd get. This was back before spam calls were an epidemic. Or how her phone was mysteriously off one night when I needed to get a hold of her. I had my suspicions, and then finally it clicked into place when I did some Instagram snooping and found a guy who followed her who posted a selfie wearing a very unique jacket that belonged to her. I confronted her the next day. She denied it. Tears. Begging. All of that. I dumped her and walked away. The next day I messaged that guy on Instagram and he confirmed everything. Had no idea I existed. He dumped her too. Last I heard, she's an EMT in Utah, Wyoming. Hope she figured out how not to be a garbage person. He went to Hawaii for a business trip without his wife and kids. Like a good wife, I packed his clothes before he left and unpacked his dirty laundry when he returned home. I found a tiny pair of white cotton panties, no lace, in his suitcase. He had recently dropped a lot of weight, 100 lbs, and played it off that he had bought them for himself. They had no label and were simple bikinis, so theoretically could have been men's as well. It did sort of explain the pretty brunette that followed him off the plane at the airport and kept looking at my kids and I at the luggage carousel. What an A to make his side piece come face to face with his wife and kids. I made sure he wore those panties at least once a week for the remaining few months we were together. I set out his clothes every day and he couldn't protest. LMAO, you have a hilarious sense of humor. 4 years ago I was dating a girl who became distant and disinterested in a lot of things we both enjoy together. Despite attempts to talk about it, she only grew more distant, then became less available to hang out, and suddenly was working late a lot. I started getting suspicious about cheating when she was on her phone non-stop. Again, I tried to talk about it but she wouldn't engage. She also just didn't want to break up with me for whatever reason. I was actually going to end it on my own, But one weekend when she was seemingly unavailable, some mutual friends told me they spotted her with a dude from her work and they were all over each other. Coincidentally, she had also lent me her iPad and it was synced to her phone, so I saw lots of texts between those two over that weekend. They were talking about running away together, etc. He was married and her supervisor. Mutual friends were also composed of her co-workers and reported them to HR. They were both forced to do training on not sleeping with co-workers. They were both denied promotion, his wife left him, and she moved overseas. Sucked at the time, I was devastated, but karma got them good. The 1st of June, 2018. Normal day. A Friday. My husband had kissed me goodbye and gone to work. I was cleaning the house for company who was coming to stay the weekend. The doorbell rang. There was a man at my door who introduced himself as the husband of a woman who my husband worked with. He was there to tell me that my husband and his wife were having an affair. He had busted them about 6 months prior and had told his wife that she had to end the affair. He thinks that she did end it, for about 3 months, but then they started up again. When he found out they were at it again, he called my husband because he knew if he confronted him in person, he'd be in a jail cell for what he'd have done. On the phone, he told my husband to leave his wife alone or else he would come and tell me everything that was happening. Apparently, my husband thought that he was bluffing. So I was literally the last to know. My husband never came home again. He got an Airbnb and a lawyer. The divorce was the 21st of December, 2018. We had been together for 24 years. Still hurts. This isn't my story, but my parents. My mom had a boyfriend when my parents met, and she broke up with him to be with my dad. Fast forward 10 years or so, my parents are married with 2 kids, my older brother and me. Anyway, she travels for work semi-often and she started taking trips to see her friend in Chicago. I was young enough that I don't really remember when it started, but I noticed that my dad was really irritable on these weekends. I think I was about 12 when I realized what was going on. I figured it out before my brother did. I used to sit at the top of the stairs and listen to my parents argue. I don't even remember if I heard something that gave it away, if it slowly dawned on me as I grew up, or if one day it just hit me. It's always just been a part of my life that my mom lies. Still is. My dad used to beg me to not say anything to her that I knew because A, he was desperate to keep the family together, and 2, my mom would get on his case for getting the kids involved. No joke. One day, during the summer after I graduated high school, I came home from work to find my mom in the garage loading up her car. I asked her why she was putting blankets in her car and she got quiet for a moment and said, "Well, I'm moving out. I just went inside." Later she texted my dad that she had moved to her brother's house. That's how he found out. They were married for 20 years and she sent him a freaking text message. I don't know if she was planning on telling me at all if I hadn't happened to come home when I did, or if she would have just disappeared. There have been times when she left without telling me she was going somewhere. I'd realize that I hadn't seen my mother in a few days and ask my dad where she was and he'd be like, "Oh, she didn't tell you? She's in Montreal for a week," or something like that. So anything possible. Eater. Also, this thread had around 300 comments when I started typing this, and by the time I posted it was at 1.3k, so this is totally going to get buried, LMAO. I owned a house with my fiance. I woke up in the middle of the night and he wasn't in bed. I went searching. His truck and another vehicle were in the driveway. Then, I went upstairs and found the guest bedroom was locked. After barging my way in, I found him with another woman in bed. That bed happened to be my childhood bed. He forced me out of the room. Literally grabbed me by the neck and pushed me out and closed the door back. I knew I couldn't do anything at that point, so I called his parents who lived a few blocks away. His dad showed up and another fight broke out. I ended up leaving and staying at his parents until dawn. I moved out that weekend and let the house foreclose. 9 years later. It's finally off my credit report. I'm happily married to an amazing man and we own a beautiful home together. In the same house. Brazen doesn't even begin to describe it. Glad things worked out for you in the long run. Edit due to pronoun issues TLDR. My ex-husband was sleeping with his best friend's wife while I was 8 months pregnant. It had been going on for a while. I was 8 months pregnant with our second child at the time and he wanted to go visit his brother for the weekend. I asked my doctor if it was safe for me to travel and she said it would be fine. I told my husband I could go but he said he was really hoping to just have some time with his brother. I understood because a new baby really makes it hard to spend quality time, but I asked if he could take our older son 3 years at the time so he could see his grandma and cousins. He said they were planning on drinking and whatnot and wasn't sure it would be a good idea. Fear country boys so think shooting, drinking and whatnot. I agreed and he left for the weekend. After he left I get a call from his best friend telling me that he'll be in town for the weekend and he wanted to meet up. Not weird he called me because my husband was terrible at answering his phone. I told him unfortunately my husband was visiting back home. Bad timing. His best friend then said okay, I'm going to call you back. And hung up very abruptly. Turns out my husband and his wife had been caught by him a few months previously and he gave them a chance to make it right. I don't know why. He didn't tell me but threatened to if they didn't stop. Well, they didn't stop and he told me. I think the worst part was that my husband's family knew and never once thought to tell me. These people were my family for 5 years and nothing. It's been almost 10 years now and I'm so much happier, but it was definitely an eye-opening experience. His family knew and didn't tell you? Oh my god, that's awful. The husband of one of the women he was cheating on me with called me at work. At first I didn't believe him and hung up. How could the man I spent the past 8 years with, had 2 beautiful babies with, suffered together the loss of one of those children do something so hurtful? Still a part of me had doubt. He had affairs in other relationships and we had a rocky patch early in the beginning where I suspected an affair but didn't have proof. I told my boss I felt sick and had to leave early and I called this guy back and found out that my ex and his wife along with one of their friends were all sleeping together for about a year. He had confronted my ex and told him that he was going to tell me, but my ex convinced him to wait a month since my mother had just died. I took my time coming home and confronted him and told him to pack and leave. Since I've pieced together a lot of what happened and all the lies he told me, where if I was in a different headspace I might have caught onto the affairs earlier. I also found videos hidden on one of our computers and found out he was having booty calls in our apartment while I was at work and he was watching our daughter. At that point it put the headstone on any possibility of reconciliation. While your daughter was in the house? Jesus Christ. I found a used condom on the bathroom floor. I just emailed him a 30-day end of tenancy notice. I own the house. I'm assuming the cheating was confirmed in this case, and it wasn't just him having a posh wank. I was married. Out of the blue while at work I get an email that says husband's name s wife. When I open the email it lists off a name and says husband's name married to her. Check on Facebook. English was not the first language, this was overseas. So I do, and what do I see? Tons and tons and tons and tons of pictures of a woman with my husband. The woman and her kids with my husband. The woman and her family with my husband. I was stunned to say the least. It was the 6th of October 2017, 7 months after I almost died from an ectopic pregnancy. Yet we were trying at that point to have kids. After work I went home and started throwing all of his stuff in the dumpster. He was out of town at the time so I had plenty of time to do it. Spent all of Saturday and Sunday throwing everything he owned in the dumpster. A month later I moved to a new apartment and waited until then to tell him I was divorcing him. He then killed himself a few months later. Fuck, I didn't expect that ending. Very unhealthy relationship. He was emotionally very abusive and I was in a terrible place with my mental health. I found out at the ultrasound to determine the gender of our child. He was late and I was noodling on Facebook waiting to be called. He was tagged in some photos in my news feed from a gig he'd been at on the previous weekend. Random lass was in all the photos of him and they were all over each other. Also they were making out in the background of one photo. He turned up after I was called in. While the technician was printing the images I told him I knew. He went off and on about how I was making it up. He'd never do that. Obviously I was lying to compensate for cheating on him and so on. When I pointed out there were photos he stormed out and left me there. My dad had turned up during the appointment anticipating that he'd react badly if we were having a girl, which he did. That was scattered through the cheating denials and took me home. I considered us broken up at that point and stopped all contact except texts related to the pregnancy. Mostly I was relieved. I had concrete evidence that it wasn't in my head and I finally managed to escape that relationship. Oh, story time. Classic love at first sight. I love you after 2 weeks. Moved in together after 2 months. Engaged after 6. Been together for 4 years and change. Left my rent control bachelor pad and picked a bigger apartment so she could have her art studio. Did everything together and split all bills 50/50. We had different jobs in the same industry and made around the same money. We really loved each other and, as cliche as it sounds, completed each other. I am very analytical and stoic and she is a liberal artist. She goes to Comic-Con in Nick. She is an expositor. I help her pack. I drop her at the airport. Everything was fine. No signs of anything. She should be back in 4 days. She never came back home. She simple disappeared. Ghosted. The day she should be home I freak out that she may be dead just to find myself blocked on everything. Email, phone, social media, the works. Everything I know is due to the bills she left behind, all unpaid. The credit card we shared she stopped paying 2 months before, and her cell phone bill, which T-Mobile was nice enough to give me a log because technically was on my SSN. Found one particular Nick area code over and over on the call history and put 2 plus 2 together. She met him on San Diego Comic-Con few months before and methodically and systematically put together a plan to abandon me, take as much as she could to Nick and never look back. Plot twist, she maxed out credit card and Amazon card furnishing their new home in New York City. By the time grief turned into practicality it was too late for me to cancel everything. I literally had to log in and see all purchases of houseware, made with my money, for a house I will never live in. I could not live at our house or afford our lifestyle in one income alone. It was a good 6 months of blackout drunk, Tinder and overall self-loath. I am sure I caused damage to other people in the process. It wasn't even the love part that hurt me the most, but the flat out betrayal and economic damage took me over a year of living paycheck to get all balances to zero. She is a Redditor, if you are reading this Fry. I don't hate you, but you destroyed my self-esteem forever. I cannot ever trust anyone ever again. You ripped my heart from my chest, watched it die slowly and didn't care for the mess. Edit. Thanks for the wishes but please don't hate on her. To this day, all I wanted is to know why she did it. Where did I fail as a partner or as a man? Edit 2. This is the gentleman she left me for. I've became close friends with his ex. She wrote the column linked above and we shared stories and became good friends. That helped me a lot. Zoe, you rock. Edit 3. Who would know my biggest heartbreak would blow up? Thanks for the support. Please do not hate on her. I am not suing anyone. It has been 2-ish year by now and TBH I would pay to know why she left over trying to get my money back. Total amount was 7-ish give or take, plus having to move out and losing a nice rent control condo. Money come and goes. Lack of closure may last forever. Final edit. It's crazy how much people can change in such a small amount of time. How you can think you know someone in and out, but they can still surprise you in the worst ways. How they can say such nasty, childish things when before you had so much respect for how they held themselves and how they acted. And regardless of how much you prepare yourself, it still hurts. You just have to remind yourself that not everyone has the same heart you do. And regardless of how angry it might make you, nothing is worth sinking to that level. Being the bigger person is always the only positive to come out of something so negative. Be safe out there. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment.